Hello and welcome to e-learning in teacher education, the 6th International Science and Practical Conference and the first in virtual form, organised by the Institute of Psychology and Education in Kazan Federal University. My name is Conor GALVIN. I'm from University College Dublin in Ireland, and I'll be offering the anchor paper in this strand of the conference.
The title of this short talk is Reimagining and Remaking Teacher Education, Professionalism, Capability and At-Distance Learning in a Changed World. Now, I'd like to think a little bit initially about the concept of professionalism and capability, because these have been central ideas within university education for as far back as we'd like to go. The particular picture and instance in hand here, 1852, John Henry Newman founded a university in Dublin, which was about knowledge. It was about knowledge that was worth possessing for what it is, not merely for what it does. As I say, that was 1852. That's changed quite appreciably in recent times, so that nowadays when you look at a picture something like this, you can't really tell in one sense whether you're looking at a business park, a corporate headquarters, a university campus. In this case, it is actually a university campus. It's my home campus at University College Dublin. But the point is that it reflects a change in how we understand universities, their functions, their purposes, how we understand change in relation to that concept of education, and a vision that is largely different from that of the previous generations, the previous centuries, a vision based in the idea that universities are about promoting the economic role, and not just universities indeed, but higher education in general. All the old familiarities are starting to slip away. They're starting to change. And they're not just changing slightly, they're changing deeply and in many ways irrevocably. This is where the change is coming from. It's led from outside. It's not essentially change that's come from within the university. It's come from other places, other visions, other versions of what it is to train, to educate. And I think we need to understand that, because it's important for what I want to go on and look at in relation to the changes we are experiencing and the changes we will experience in relation to teacher education in the near and not too distant future. At the heart of this new vision is a sense of a view of the learner that is really, if you are educated, you are work ready. As Bista has put it particularly well, education is framed in terms of building human capital, and this positions people as resources, as means to an end, as instruments for state and or market needs, much more so than individuals in need of some kind of personal growth and empowerment. A similar view can be found in relation to the teacher, in relation to new visions and new versions of the teacher. To teach or to educate is to make work ready. And what we're seeing here, more so than anywhere else, I think, reflects change globally. It's this concept of pragmatic economic requirement that is about ensuring the competitiveness of the nation's economic service and the readiness of school leavers for the job market. Now, that's been captured all over the world. We've seen it, again, people like Stephen Ball, Martin Lone, writing in the European context. We've seen it also, writings from people like Bisek, Kaprjan and Fruman, as far back as 2013, in the Russian context, wrote about similar changes and the implications of these. Effectively, they are reflecting a global discourse. They are reflecting a discourse that presents teacher education as failure. They're presenting this discourse that presents teachers as facilitators, resources, something that are part of a system. It's global because we've seen it just about everywhere, and it has affected teacher education in just about every developed country in the world. The concept, the core concept, is that human capital is a response to a crisis, and that we have to be innovative and we have to be disruptive. Human capital is about business, service, forming skills. It's not about educating people in the same sense that we would have done in the past. These were changes that were all happening before the current crisis. And that's important to bear in mind, because once the crisis hit, once we started to suffer the effects of COVID-19, and all that goes with it, and once we started experiencing the related, what is now termed pivot to online and at distance learning and education, what we saw was, in relation to teacher education, a huge amount of lifting and shifting, simply taking things and taking entire programs, taking semesters, taking websites, taking webinars, taking all of these things and just simply dropping them all online, making little, if any, allowance for what can change or what could change. And in many ways, what is termed the new reality, and to my mind, it's very, very far from a reality and it's very far from new, but it is increasingly something that we're going to have to live with and live through. The new context in which we live raises a series of very interesting questions for us as teacher educators. For example, how do we reposition teacher educating to meet the needs of this changed world? What do we hold on to? What do we need to consider releasing in terms of the values, the beliefs, the imaginaries, and so on that sustain our activities as teacher educators and have done so down the years? And most importantly, perhaps in terms of the current conference and the current paper, how can advances and understandings associated with technology and especially e-learning, how can we take these, how can we embrace them, how can we make them part of a forward-looking vision for teacher education and teacher formation? And that's what I'd like to consider for the balance of the time available to me. I think a good way to do this is to start with lessons from the field, to have a look and see what other people are actually doing, to have a look at recent ongoing projects that consider this whole area of technology and how it can be used in teacher education. I'm thinking of things like the EU Erasmus Plus funded ITE Lab project, which I'll speak about in a few minutes' time. I'm also thinking of things like the EUN eTwinning Initial Teacher Learning Initiative, the iron project movement, the Microsoft Innovative Educator Awards program, and then the many smaller ones like the teacher learning initiatives in Cyprus, just to mention a few. When you step back and have a look at the activities of these projects and movements, you notice a couple of kind of key precepts or key ideas seem to continually pop up from an examination of what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. Basically, what they're doing is placing the human face of teaching and education at the center of the activity. They insist on what we might call sociable learning environments, whether they are online or otherwise. That's the first of the key precepts that you'll notice when you look across projects like this. The second is that they tend to put an emphasis on rethinking, repurposing, and reusing what's out there, rather than inventing things from scratch. So they take content, they take constructs, they take learning communities, they add to them, and they take from them in terms of learning. And that's a key and important point, because it's this combination of being sociable and being ecological that actually allows a project to maintain its sustainability in the longer term, so that the impacts and the outcomes are more effective. Now, one such project, and I've only time to look at one, unfortunately, today, is the ITE Lab Erasmus Plus Key Action 2 project, which is just recently completed. It was a 2017-2020 project, the only one of its kind. It was funded to look at the interactions of teacher education and the provider companies, the companies that sell us the technology and so on. What was really interesting was we all went in with very different expectations, but we all came out having learned a very considerable amount. This is typical of the sort of product that comes out of projects like the ITE Lab. In our case, we ended up producing 3 modular frameworks. The titles are pretty much self-explanatory, but the idea that unites them, that connects them, is that they were co-produced. They weren't just designed by one of the partners in the project, one of the academic partners or one of the commercial company partners. They were co-produced by sets of partners and also by individual students. So individual initial teacher education students contributed to the design and the production of the materials that you actually see here. And in one sense, that's why they were so difficult to make, and hopefully will have a life well beyond the project itself. Indeed, they're all freely available to download from the project website, and you can see this, the link there if you're interested in using them. Several languages, and as I say, each set based on the approach and structure that's used for modules in universities, but much more flexible and open than a typical module structure and content. This is an example of the sorts of activities that we were involved in that project. It's an online offline. It's a hybrid. You see one group of the project students in Dublin. You see another group in Santarém. You see a third group in Perugia. And what's happening is in real time, synchronously, they're interacting with each other, doing activities and projects associated with the ITE Lab. Now, it's blended in the true sense of the term because there were online and offline activities, but you notice that it was also very sociable. The activities involved groups of students mixed across the sites, and it was very ecological also, in the sense that we used and reused materials from different parts of the project team. Our MOOC is similar. It was highly interactive and it was very successful as these things go. The interesting point was it was directed purely at initial teachers, people who are in the early stages of formation, and as such, it I think is one of a kind. There are not terribly many more, to the best of my knowledge, that are directed purely at initial teacher education, both primary and secondary. You might be interested in knowing that this MOOC will continue to run, may run again actually in the autumn. We're looking at a possible October run of 2 to 3 weeks, and it covers all of the skills associated with network teaching in the 21st century. What held the whole thing together, of course, was our North Star, as we like to refer to it. Everything we did on the project connected directly or indirectly to this particular piece of work, the European Framework for Digital Competence of Educators. And we found this very useful. Again, it was something to start conversations. It was something to use to help us structure our thinking, and also to get a sense of where we were going and why we were going that direction in relation to what we're doing in our modules and in the MOOC. In short, I suppose what the project emphasized, and what many projects like it emphasize, is the idea of getting value from technology. It's not about using technology just for the sake of using technology. It's about using technology in a way that your students, the student teachers, and in some cases the students they are working with in their placement schools, will benefit. If there is no benefit, there is no value. And if there's no value, you really are wasting your time. And we came to that conclusion very early on in terms of the work we're doing on ITE Lab. Consequently, everything we did subsequently was directed towards having some use, utility, some value to the student teacher in the short term as well as the medium and longer term. Another aspect of the work we did with our student teachers within this project, and it's replicated in many other similar projects, is to encourage young students, young teachers to take part in communities of educators online. Now, we were very lucky in the sense that all 3 of our major partners have their own professional community of teachers associated with their products, if you like, their activities. We were able to link our student teachers up to these communities as part and parcel of the work that they did. And it was great benefit for them. They learned a lot. It opened doors. It introduced them to interesting ideas, made all sorts of things possible that might not have been possible previously. A similar community, and indeed one that I highly recommend, is eTwinning, the Community for Schools in Europe. This is probably the largest teacher and teaching community anywhere in the world. It is on the go now for well over 15 years, has vast numbers of schools, vast numbers of members, but the irony of that is that everybody is an individual. Everybody has a place in the e-twinning spaces. Everybody has the opportunity to become involved in projects and to take part in continuous professional development related to this particular vision of what it is to be a teacher in Europe today. So in many ways, when you look at the key findings, for example, that came out of the ITE lab, they emphasize the importance of three things. They emphasize that when you're interested in using technology, you really have to think about placing technology fully within the initial teacher education curriculum that you're providing. You have to support student-teacher learning for practice, and you have to support them from practice. And that's something that comes slowly. It's something we're not always very used to doing, but you have to actually find ways and opportunities to do that. The sorts of activities that ITE Lab were involved in, the sorts of materials we developed, the protocols, the activities, all of those helped in terms of opening up that learning space for student teachers. You have to support your student teachers in terms of building confidence. And this is key, regardless of whether it's online or offline. You really have to invest time, energy, and effort. You have to be there for them. You have to be a presence, real or virtual, in their lives when it comes to advice, guidance, support, direction. You have to be open. You have to encourage them to be creative. You have to be creative yourself. And you also have to invest in concepts of innovative practices, because if you don't lead in terms of the practice, they're not going to follow. And we found that particularly in relation to the ITE lab. Finally, you have to invest in imagination and in leadership. And that can come from anywhere within the system. It doesn't have to be the management of the school or the leadership of your department. It can come from within your own heart. It can come from within your own team. It can come from the students. As I said, we use student teachers quite extensively within the ITE lab to sound out and to take their suggestions in relation to what we could be doing better and what we should be doing as far as they were concerned when it came to using technology. You also have to use the partners that find you or that you find, whether they are institutional partners, academic partners, or whether they're business partners. It is profoundly important that you see what they have, that you take, reuse, repurpose, invest time, energy, and effort in making new practices, ideas, and so on out of older materials that already exist. So to what end and to what purpose? Why are we talking about all of this? Why are we thinking about all of this? And why so now in particular? Well, I think the COVID crisis has given us a wonderful moment. It's allowed us to think very carefully and very deeply about how we might reconstruct the practice in the field of teacher education in such a way that it enables more capable use of technology, and that becomes a key element of the identity or the habitus of the young teacher as they go out into the teaching world. It allows us to help embrace the concept of making and remaking, so that what we do takes on a quality that is referred to in the literature as value creation, and that this value creation is done at the level of the individual and also at the level of the community, in our case, the teacher education community. There is a strong argument that this will help us in terms of giving us voice, giving us agency, and allowing us to reclaim some of the status that has been lost by teachers for, I would argue, all the wrong reasons in recent times in various parts of the world. Now, my thinking in relation to this idea of value creation has been heavily influenced by an academic that will be well known to many of you, Etienne Wenger, the person who came up originally with the concepts of situated learning and the concepts of communities of practice in relation to learning as a professional activity. Now, Etienne Wenger, trainer, has produced a book in recent times, Learning in Landscapes of Practice, and it is a superb study in how to go about value creation, how to go about helping young teachers to develop identity, to develop habitus, to develop values that are appropriate to our profession, to develop the attitudes that will help them survive, that will help them thrive in difficult contexts. And the main point in all of this is that these are derived through practice. Learning takes place in the landscapes of practice. I think that's a profoundly important concept, and I'm more than happy to say that we built heavily on that when it came to ideas to do with the initial teacher education project, the ITE lab. And I'm very pleased to see that it's happened in many other places as well. Value creation itself, however, is not enough. There needs to be more. There needs to be other sources that inform our practice. There needs to be other voices. There needs to be a range of possibilities that are open to young teachers when it comes to creating the professional selves that will serve them well going forward into the third and fourth decade of the current century. And I'd like to briefly turn to some of those at this point. One of the most interesting voices out there currently is actually a collective one. It's the voice of the Advisory Panel for Teacher Education that was put together 2016 by the Government of Norway. Now, they've just released a report on the work that they've conducted over the past 4 years, and it's fascinating reading. It's 200 plus pages, but it's amazing how they cover so many of the issues that we are talking about here today. Professionalism, creativity, capability, the concept of pedagogical strengths, the fascinating idea of community, and particularly this wonderful concept of confidence and belief, and how important that is for young teachers as they move forward into their working lives. When you take something like that and you layer it onto what we already know about good teaching and the Teaching Act generally, when you add it to concepts of designing for learning, teaching the lesson well, reviewing and renewing your work on the basis of your teaching acts, we have a very powerful prescription for an enduring understanding of what teaching can be and perhaps should be, and which impacts on us as teacher educators. If we can sign up to something like this, then I think it's profoundly important that we do so. It gives us credibility, it gives us a strong sense of what needs to be done, and it confirms our better understandings and our intuitions in regard to what's important and why it's important for teachers and in teacher education. And of course, there's one other voice that's profoundly important, the voice of the students. Because if we don't hear the voice of the students, if we don't make it a point on a daily basis to listen to those young voices, to help them structure the discourse, to help them respond to the negative discourses that are out there, then surely, we're failing ourselves and we're failing them in some shape or form. It's a worthwhile activity, teacher education. We need to help them see and have the language and have the experiences that will allow them to perceive it as such, to value it as such, and to practice it as such.
Well, in summary, In this brief talk, I've considered the need to create a positive academic discourse centred on understandings of professionalism, creativity and technical capability, and to do so in ways that we, as the academic teacher education community, can begin to position ourselves in terms of the principles, the values, the attitudes that would allow us to sustain, to endure and to flourish, and to offer the type of teacher education that is most appropriate in the world that technology now makes possible. My intention was to offer some thoughts and ideas to take into the webinars and discussions that follow in the virtual IFTE 2020 here in Kazan. I wish you every success with the rest of that conference and forum.